Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we carry on with our look at Carl Wilson guest appearances on other people's records. The plan today is to finish off the 1970s and make a little start on the 1980s. Obviously, there is plenty to get to. Next up is one of Carl's more unexpected guest appearances on the track Red Lake from Lake's Lake 2 album, released in April 1978. The liner notes for the Lake 2 album include a special thanks to Carl Wilson and James William Garcio on Red Lake. Lake was an Anglo-German band founded in Hamburg. Their first album was released in Europe in 1976 and in the US in 1977. All the lyrics on Lake 2 are in English. Lake 2 was recorded at studios in Hamburg, South Wales, and at Caribou Studios. I assume it was the proximity to Caribou that resulted in Carl and Jim Garcio appearing on Red Lake. I noticed that Lake had appeared on the bill with Chicago at the Nuremberg Rock Festival on September 3, 1977, so that might have been the beginning of the connection to Garcio that led them to recording at Caribou. I tried to research that connection a little more, but you can understand the difficulty in Googling Lake and Chicago and coming up with anything apart from Lake Michigan. Anyway, Lake's sound on Lake 2 is somewhere between Supertramp and Pablo Cruise, more like Supertramp on some tracks and more like Pablo Cruise on Red Lake. After a lead guitar intro, Red Lake becomes piano-based with a lead vocal that sounds like the early Elton John country voice that most of you would know from the first verse of Burn Down the Mission. It's a melodic, mid-tempo tune that seems to pick up speed on the choruses and finishes with a return to the guitar that opened it for a big, clear guitar solo at the end. The backing vocals consist of ahs and oohs in a transition piece from the verses to the choruses that begins with hazy lights and hazy streets, and then singing along with the lead vocal to sort of punch some power into the choruses. I can't specifically hear Carl, but it's not at all difficult to believe he's in there. The song, like the entire Red Lake 2 album, is pretty nice and sounds very, very much like 1978. For me, that's the enjoyable thing about it. Even though I never heard the album until decades later, it sounds so much like the period it was recorded that I can put it on and be transported to 1978. Lake disbanded following the release of their 1986 album, So What? Lake was revived with some membership changes in the early 2000s and released 3 additional studio albums between 2005 and 2014. Maybe part of the reason that Lake 2 sounds so of its time is that in 1978 there were big changes coming in music, with new wave and punk making their influences felt. And on the records that we'll be talking about for a while now, we will see artists trying in one way or another to deal with those changes. Carl's next guest appearance is probably even more unexpected. On the Japan-only Pink Lady single Surfin' Pirates, released on July 7, 1979. Pink Lady were Mitsuyo Nimoto, better known as Mi, and Kyoko Masuda, better known as K. It's easy to know who's who because I've still never seen a photo where it isn't Mi on the left and K on the right. Since their debut in 1976, all 12 of Pink Lady's singles had gone top 10 in Japan, with 9 of them going to number 1. Surfin' Pirates, or Naminori Pirates in Japanese, was Pink Lady's 13th single. It featured a different version of the song on each side of the record. The A side is faster than the B side, with a different backing vocal arrangement sung in Japanese. It has a fuller arrangement with strings and a saxophone break. It's more polished and coherent, and definitely sounds like the A side of the single. The B side is an alternate version of Surfing Pirates billed on the single, as far as I can make out, as the USA version. It's a completely different recording. It's arranged by Paul Feuerso, who plays keyboards and percussion, with fellow Beach Boys band members Ed Carter on guitar and bass, and Ed Taduri on drums. Feuerso also gets a co-writing credit added to Mi Nimoto and Kei Masuda on this version. The record could easily have been billed as featuring the Beach Boys, since backing Mi and Kay on the vocals are Carl, Brian, Mike, and still former Beach Boy at the time, Bruce Johnston. The USA version opens with a mildly punk rock guitar before piano comes in as the lead instrument. Piano switches to organ and back again throughout the song. You get more vaguely punky guitar instead of sax and strings in the midsection. It sounds like 50s malt shop pop rock as reimagined for a late 70s TV variety show. You almost can't help but imagine Pink ladies singing this in pink satin Letterman jackets and bright polyester poodle skirts. Having 4 current and former Beach Boys on the record is largely wasted. They don't sing in English or Japanese. Their backing vocals are prevalent throughout the record, but are mostly limited to some very generic oohs and ahs. It's literally ooh-ah, 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 ooh in spots. There's some doo-wop singing at the ending with a high voice sailing over the top. It doesn't really sound like Brian, it's just somebody doing the stereotypical doo-wop sound. The single was released on July 7, 1979, about a month ahead of the Beach Boys' first tour of Japan since 1966. They arrived in Japan on August 3rd with their first show on August 4th, and the tour wound up on August 8th. Surfin' Pirates went to number 4 in Japan and reportedly sold 550,000 copies. That's big, especially when you consider that the total population of Japan was 115.9 million in 1979. Surfin' Pirates will turn out to be Pink Ladies' last top 10 single, possibly because they turned their sights on the American market instead. Pink Lady actually became well known for a short time in the US early in 1980 when they were cast in their own NBC variety series, Pink Lady, also known as Pink Lady and Jeff, with comedian Jeff Altman. Altman was about as well known in the US as Pink Lady was. The series was from Sid and Marty Krofft, who had brought a similar variety series, Donnie and Marie and the Brady Bunch Variety Hour, along with lots of Saturday morning kids TV, and they were certainly no strangers to launching weird, long-shot TV shows. One complication for Pink Lady in doing a show for US TV was that neither me or Kay spoke English. They had to learn their lines phonetically. Probably most people who heard about the show knew it from the fact that it became a punchline on late-night television for a little while. There are 2 phrases that come to mind about this series. 1, it's so crazy it just might work, and 2, let's throw it at the wall and see what sticks. It didn't work and it didn't stick. Pink Lady and Jeff premiered on March 1st, 1980, and ended on April 11th, 1980 for a total of 6 episodes. With their fortunes on the wane at home after spending so much time in the US, Pink Lady disbanded after a farewell concert in Tokyo. They've both remained active in the music business, and Pink Lady have had numerous reunions over the years. Jeff Altman, incidentally, has remained active in comedy and in film and television roles. And with that, we've moved into the 1980s, specifically the spring of 1980, around the time of the release of the Beach Boys' Keepin' the Summer Alive album for What's Your Hurry Darlin', a song co-written by Carl Wilson and Randy Bachman, and released by Bachman's band Ironhorse. Randy Bachman, of course, had most famously been a member of the Guess Who from 1965 to 1970, and Bachman Turner Overdrive from 1973 to 1977. After leaving BTO, he made one solo album, then joined Tom Sparks to form Ironhorse in 1979. They released a self-titled debut album that year, and a single from the album, Sweet Louie Louise, went to US number 36 in the spring of 1979. It turned out to be their only US hit. Ironhorse toured opening for the Beach Boys in the spring and summer of 1979. It was during this time that Bruce Johnston, reportedly, suggested that Randy Bachman and Carl might try writing songs together. 3 songs emerged from their collaboration. Keepin' the Summer Alive and Livin' with a Heartache, both of course on the Beach Boys' Keepin' the Summer Alive album released in March of 1980. Livin' with a Heartache was also released as a single A-side on May 21st, 1980. The third Carl Wilson-Randy Bachman co-composition, What's Your Hurry Darlin', was released as the lead-off single for the second Ironhorse album on April 14th, 1980, and on the Everything is Grey album released on May 12th, 1980. We talked about some of this way back in episode 26, Randy Bachman Meets the Beach Boys. Carl doesn't appear on the record. It's a co-writing credit only. I really like the Ironhorse record. The verses remind me a little of Roy Orbison meets the Everly Brothers. The chorus is really great and gallops along with some nice backing vocals, and some very nice Randy Bachman guitar. Of the three Carl Wilson-Randy Bachman co-compositions, this one is actually my favorite. If there are demos of these songs with Carl and Randy Bachman, those would be great to hear sometime. I would love to hear a version of What's Your Hurry Darlin' with Carl on it. In any case, they seem to have a nice collaboration going, and I wish they had done more. Ironhorse disbanded after Everything Is Gray, and Randy Bachman reunited with Fred Turner to form a new band, Union, who released one album, On Strike, in 1981. It contains their version of Keepin' the Summer Alive, shown on the album as Keep the Summer Alive. Not surprisingly, it emphasizes guitar over vocals and rocks along nicely. It's a good version, and I've always thought if you could combine the Union instrumental track with the vocals from the Beach Boys version, you'd have the ultimate Keepin' the Summer Alive. By the way, I've always thought the verses of Keepin' the Summer Alive were awfully similar to the verses of BTO's Takin' Care of Business. Compare When It's Ice Cream Weather, Get the Gang Back Together, Roll Down the Windows and Ride, to You Get Up Every Morning from Your Alarm Clock's Warning, Take the 8:15 into the City, and I think you'll see what I mean. As we go through Carl Wilson's guest appearances chronologically, I thought it was important to note that we've now reached the point where he stopped touring with the Beach Boys temporarily and recorded his first solo album. In September 1980, sessions began for what would become the Carl Wilson album and continued through the end of the year. As we know, he announced he was dissatisfied with the state of the Beach Boys, noting, among other things, their refusal to rehearse and his dislike of long residencies playing venues like Las Vegas, which, especially at the time, were equated with artistic stagnation. He was quoted as saying, "I haven't quit the Beach Boys, but I don't plan on touring with them until they decide that 1981 means as much to them as 1961. Carl's first solo album was released on March 5, 1981, followed by a low-key solo tour and a stint opening for the Doobie Brothers. About 6 months later, Carl guest appeared on another debut solo album, this one by Peter Cetera of Chicago, released in September of 1981. Carl and Peter Cetera, of course, already had a long history. Carl had already appeared on Wishin' You Were Here and Baby What a Big Surprise, two Chicago hits written by Cetera, and had done backing vocals with Cetera on Via from the King Harvest album, on the Angelo album, and on Ricky Martin's Beached. It's probably not surprising then that Peter Cetera called on Carl to appear on his debut solo album in 1981. Carl is credited with second guitar on the second track of the Peter Cetera album, I Can Feel It. He co-wrote the track with Cetera and Ricky Fatar, who plays drums on the track and drums on all but two of the tracks on the entire album. There are no backing vocals on I Can Feel It, though you get Cetera duetting with himself toward the end. For reference, the song sounds a little bit like the later Battleship Chains by the Georgia Satellites, crossed with the rockier stuff from Carl's first solo album like The Right Lane. Overall, apart from a big ballad that opens side 2, the album seems to alternate between relatively stripped-down rockers like this one and early 80s new wave influenced numbers with synthesizers that sound very much of their time. It gives the impression of having been a side project, which it actually was. Peter Cetera hadn't left Chicago, but at the time, their popularity seemed to be waning in the wake of new wave. Jazz-influenced brass-heavy pop rock certainly seemed out of step with the times. They'd had 2 number 14 singles over the last 3 years, but hadn't been in the top 10 since Baby What a Big Surprise went to number 4 late in 1977. Peter Cetera will peak at number 143 on the US album chart. Cetera felt that the record company didn't give the album enough promotion because they feared that he would quit Chicago if the album became a success. He's certainly not the first member of a major group to get that feeling about a solo release. Cetera and Chicago's prospects will change considerably when Chicago 16 is released a few months later in June 1982. The album's single, Hard to Say I'm Sorry, with a new, modern, adult contemporary sound, will go to number 1 on September 11, 1982, and Chicago will enter a whole new phase as hitmakers. In 1986, Cetera will leave Chicago for a very successful solo career. Next up for us is America's View from the Ground album, released on July 15, 1982, on which Carl makes his second appearance on an America album. The album liner notes give general credits only, just listing Carl among the vocalists. It seems likely that Carl is in there on the oohs and ahs on plenty of these tracks, but I can't specifically swear that it's him that I'm hearing anywhere. As you can see, by this time America was down to a duo following the departure of Dan Peek in 1977, the year after their most recent top 40 hit. America had updated their look and sound for the 80s, incorporating some drum machines and new wavy keyboards and guitars. They'd shed the country influences, but to their credit, they don't go so far that they're no longer recognizable as America. And as always, there are some good pop tunes. The single, You Can Do Magic, written and produced by Russ Ballard, returned America to the top 40 for the first time in 6 years and the top 10 for the first time in 7 years, peaking at number 8. By the way, in case you're wondering, Dewey is reading If You Could See Me Now by Peter Straub, author of Ghost Story, on the album cover. There's not quite enough time to get to anything else in this episode, so I think we'll leave it there for now. Obviously, there are many more Carl Wilson guest appearances to get to. I think next week we'll take a break from this and move on to 1964, picking up with U.S. pop culture in the third quarter, sort of carrying on from where episode 170 left off. After that, we'll talk about the All Summer Long album in depth, and then wind up with the fourth quarter of 1964. At least that's the plan as it stands now. I hope you enjoyed this. Now that we've wound up the 70s, please let me know if there are any Carl Wilson guest appearances from the 70s that I missed. I'd love to find out that there's something out there that I didn't know about. It would be really interesting. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to your comments. Have a great week. Hope to see you next time for 1964. Bye.